Now welcome to another lightning response video, where this time I'll be doing a few questions, but we're going to start with this one from Morning Talk Motivation, who asked, "Hey Thor, can you please explain how the Force was thrown out of balance from episode 1 and brought back by episode 6? Can you also explain whether or not battles between people are won before they are fought? Meaning, the Force already knows who is going to win, or is this way of thinking wrong? If the answer to above is yes, then did the Force want Qui-Gon to lose for Vader to be born, and bring balance through destroying both the Jedi and the Sith?" Okay, so the first thing you have to keep in mind here is that balance in Star Wars is actually the absence of the dark side, or the absence of those who use the dark side, or maybe I should say the absence of those who use the dark side in a significant way, significant enough to change the fate of others, and more on that in a bit. Basically, or to put it as simply as I can, imbalance is caused by those that use the dark side to shape the course of events in major ways, or on the galactic scale even, like the Sith almost always end up trying to do because their greed, ambition, and so on, it knows no limits. That's kind of what makes them a Sith. They've been completely consumed by the dark side, which in itself seeks to corrupt and consume, kind of like a cancer, you could say. And as we know in episode 1, the Sith finally reveal themselves and start really putting their plan to conquer the galaxy into motion after 1,000 years of hiding in the shadows, basically. However, even before this, with Palpatine becoming a senator and starting to trick the Trade Federation and others into doing his bidding, along with other machinations that were laying the seeds that would bloom into the Clone Wars, not to mention, especially if we consider the Plagueis novel canon, which is in my head canon, everything he had done had also started to cause imbalance, including messing around with the Force itself, essentially. And so all of that was already starting to unbalance the Force, and then the Sith revealed themselves, and since the Jedi seemed kind of blind to it all, the Force responded by creating the Chosen One, who would balance things out once more by destroying the Sith who were causing the imbalance. And I think quite clearly, the Chosen One, Anakin, was meant to be found and trained by Qui-Gon Jinn, one of the seemingly few Jedi left that were still following the will of the Force. As I've said before, it seems like the rest, or at least the Council, were following the will of the Senate and the Republic and dogmatically following the Jedi Code, to the point where they didn't want to see the Chosen One created and sent by the Force. They didn't think he should be trained because it violated their rules, or the Jedi Code. But anyway, and kind of going along with the second part of your question about are battles between individuals won before they are fought or decided by the Force somehow? And the answer to that is a resounding no. The Force cannot decide fate like that. It cannot or does not control things in that way. It can and does, however, lay out a destiny for people, as Lucas himself has even explained. It has a sort of plan or purpose for everyone, but it is up to the individual to walk that path or not. Then there's also the fact that sometimes people will have their destiny altered or denied by the actions of others, the selfish actions of others, which is why selfishness, or the dark side, especially on the grand scale, like when the Sith rule the galaxy under Palpatine, that's why they cause such a major imbalance. They tend to deny people their destiny whether they like it or not. They rob them of free will. And so, no, the Force doesn't know what is going to happen. The future is always in motion, as Yoda says. There are outcomes it would like to see happen to maintain balance, and this is the will the Jedi try to follow, the will of the Force. But others, again, can interfere. For example, Darth Maul killing Qui-Gon was obviously not a part of the Force's plan for him. He was, as I just said, destined to train Anakin. That was the will of the Force, and as a Jedi, he, Qui-Gon, follows the will of the Force and was going to train him. Even if it went against the Jedi Code or against the wishes of the Council, because Qui-Gon, he just wants to listen to the will of the Force above all else, even above the Council, which is arguably why he is at odds with the Council. Problem is, or turned out to be, that Maul follows only his own will. He has no interest in whatever destiny or fate the Force may or may not have had for him or anyone else. And he, as well as Palpatine, they want to follow their own will, create their own fate by taking over the galaxy, and thus this is why the duel between Maul, Obi-Wan, and Qui-Gon is the duel of the fates. So much is on the line here. Literally, the fate of the galaxy hangs in the balance, the fate of the Chosen One. The fate is all going to be decided by who wins or loses this one fight. And when Qui-Gon is killed by Maul, something the Force again certainly didn't want to have happen, but had no control over, this ends up messing up the fate or destiny or the choice they had, free will, of so many other people across the galaxy, because ultimately the Sith are going to win and take over the galaxy for a short time, about 25 years. Palpatine will create the Empire and bring about an age of oppression where they will be crushed under the will of the Sith. Everything will be unbalanced by this. And why things get balanced again in Episode 6, or Return of the Jedi, when Vader turns back to the light and becomes Anakin Skywalker once more and kills Palpatine in the process, is because that is the end of the Sith and the Empire. That's Anakin, in maybe a bit of a roundabout way, finally fulfilling the prophecy and destroying the Sith. He destroys both Vader and Sidious, and there is balance once more without Sith to interfere with people's free will. They again have choices. They can again either follow the destiny the Force has laid out for them, or not. It's really that simple, or complicated depending on how well I just explained all that. And so now let's move on to a somewhat related question, and this one comes to us from Michael Thomas, who asked, "Hey Thor, do the Nightsisters cause imbalance, and if not, can you explain why, you think?" And my theory here, and I'm not saying I necessarily love this answer, but my theory is simply that since the Nightsisters are isolated on Dathomir, that they're not out there trying to take over the galaxy, and they even have a community that kind of functions around the dark side or dark side magic. And since they seem to also live in relative peace with the other clans or tribes on the planet around them, they don't cause any sort of imbalance that ripples outwards, you could say, and thus the greater balance in the galaxy is not impacted by them using the dark side there on Dathomir. I'd even go so far as to say this is why the Sith perhaps were able to remain hidden for 1,000 years. They were somehow able to, suppress the urge to go out and take and consume and destroy. That kind of naturally comes with following or using the dark side, and thus no imbalance sort of rippled out that was felt by the Jedi, or that disturbed the Force enough to tell the Jedi there was a problem out there, through whispering their will to them via the midichlorians. And that will is again simply telling the Jedi where problems are that need to be fixed, and if the Sith aren't doing anything to actively cause a problem, just like the Nightsisters are not actively causing a problem, the Force isn't going to warn the Jedi about them. And do keep in mind the Jedi are aware of the existence of the Nightsisters, but leave them alone probably because no, they don't cause a problem or imbalance. And I'm not necessarily saying I love these answers again, and everyone is free to give their own take. I'd love to hear other theories here, and in all honesty or reality here, something like the Nightsisters exist because it's cool and interesting and different, not because it perfectly aligns with everything else or how it all should work. Alright, and now on to this one from MJC2289, who asked, "Hey Thor, this is an idea that's somewhat large in KOTOR 2. Kreia constantly tells the exiles showing compassion will weaken the other person, bringing more overall harm to them. There's a cutscene on Nar Shaddaa that demonstrates this quite well, where if you give a homeless man money, he will thank you, then run off and get brutally assaulted by thugs who take his money and possibly his life. Of course, Kreia is Darth Traya and is evil, not wanting any compassion, but she does have good points on the topic throughout the game." Okay, so this question is relating back to my Sunday conversation video where I talked about can there be too much light side, and I argued how, yeah, being too compassionate can bring about its own set of problems. Now, I wasn't specifically saying that there can be too much good or too much light in Star Wars. Rather, I was simply saying that sometimes, in the real world mainly, the best of intentions doesn't always lead to the best of results. Sometimes when you try to help someone too much, they become dependent, maybe even entitled, and that can hurt their self-esteem in a way when you have no place or purpose beyond others just taking care of you. And sure, as many pointed out in the comments, and they were right to do so, and I should have done it myself, but I try to keep my videos concise instead of turning them into 30-minute rambles, which they easily could. But sometimes a helping hand one time or a couple times is enough to get someone back on their feet. Certainly I, along with probably pretty much everyone watching this, they can point to a time in their life, or two or more, where things weren't going so great and a kind act made all the difference in the world. Someone helped us get back on track, even if it took a little while or maybe even a whole lot of help. But it didn't make you entitled, you became grateful and hopefully passed that kindness along when you were in a better position. And that's how compassion should work. It should be kind of contagious. And I would never argue against helping someone in need or saying that there needs to be a light and dark in Star Wars, which will go along with our next question. And so kind of going back to your example from KOTOR 2, well, honestly, I don't think it's a great example. And yes, as you point out, Kreia is trying to confuse or manipulate the exile. Sure, that needs to be kept in mind. But if you help someone or give something to them that helps them or is trying to help them, and someone else ends up hurting them and taking it from them, possibly even killing them over it, well, that's on them. That's on the person who committed the evil act. Not on you for trying to help, unless, of course, you were setting them up or something. But you helping someone and then someone else doing something evil to that person, that shouldn't fall on the person who did the kindness or the compassionate act in the first place. Alright, and let's do one final question here, and it comes to us from Silver Bullet, who asked, "Hey Thor, I like how you say balance is no Sith. I feel that way. The dark side and the Sith are not the same in my opinion. The Sith abuse the Force. They force it to bend it to their will, and use it for selfish reasons. Sith are selfish, and that makes their version of the dark side pure evil. And now that I posted this, I can't wait for you to tell me I am misinterpreting you in 5 minutes or more." And actually, I'm going to tell you that you're mainly correct in maybe 2 minutes or less. And I think you bring up a really, really interesting question that I see debated quite often, which is the dark side actually needed or not? Does it serve a purpose? Does it exist naturally? Is it a necessary part of the Force? Or does it exist only as a result of using the Force wrong or for selfish reasons? And I know some will say you need the dark side or you need it to exist for this reason or that. We need darkness to balance out the light or whatever. Or we need examples of evil to understand what good is. And I don't think I agree with that one, and maybe I'll go into that in a future video. But for now, honestly, especially the way the Force is explained in the original trilogy by Yoda, it doesn't sound like the dark side is actually needed. I think, again, in the OT, there is simply the Force, and then there is the dark side of it, which is nothing more than a corruption or a perversion of the way it should be, no more, no less, and not something that is actually needed. Even in the prequels, Yoda talks about how something like death is a natural part of life, right? It may suck that we're all going to die, that everything eventually will die, and we may, in a way, see that as a dark aspect of the Force or of life or of existence. But that death does make way for new life, and it's all part of the same cycle. Us living forever would, in a way, be selfish because unless we start colonizing the stars and can spread out our massive population, or population that would grow exponentially, it could take the chance away from others to experience this crazy thing known as life. In other words, and this is something I've sort of changed my stance on over the years, but I don't think the dark side is meant to represent the darker aspects of nature, which many people seem to think it does, and which I kind of once thought it did. At least I don't think it originally was, again going back to the OT and how Yoda kind of describes the Force as, well, being the right way and the dark side as being bad and we don't need that. Now, certainly movies like The Last Jedi have tried to change that, where Rey is talking about how she sees light and dark and balance between them all, which I don't think really makes a lot of sense. Sounds really good and philosophical, but in practicality, I don't know why that makes sense. I also think in the Clone Wars, Lucas was maybe changing his mind a little bit about what the Force is or how it should work, or allowing others to expand it in directions he didn't originally intend. Again, I think his original concept for the Force is there is simply the Force, there is the good side, and then there is the dark side, which was just all bad and served no real purpose other than to be this cancerous thing that consumed and destroyed and wasn't needed. Well, I think that's all I've got for you this time, and now it is your turn to weigh in on any or all of this. Certainly there will be some things I said that people will disagree with, or you can always ask a question for a future lightning response video. And I've got a bunch of questions that I'm going to try to answer, I think, in tomorrow's video. And I really do appreciate all the questions. Do keep them coming. And if people enjoy videos like these, I will do more of them. But either way, leave those comments below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.